There is a difference that the world refuses to acknowledge, a difference between being alone and being lonely, between choosing solitude and being abandoned by it, between a person who cannot find company and a person who found themselves in the absence of it. If you are someone who cancels plans and feels relief instead of guilt, if you recharge in silence rather than in crowds, if your happiest moments happen when there is no one else in the room, then the world has probably told you that something is wrong with you, that you are antisocial, that you are too isolated, that you need to get out more, meet people, be normal. But here is what the world will never tell you. Some of the most psychologically healthy, emotionally intelligent, and creatively gifted human beings in history were people who preferred their own company. And the reason the world has trouble understanding you is not because you are broken. It is because the world is built for extroverts, and you are operating on an entirely different frequency. This is not a flaw. This is not a disorder. And this is not something that needs to be fixed. There is deep researched psychology behind why solitude is not just your preference but your superpower. This is the psychology of people who prefer being alone. Let us clear something up immediately. Preferring solitude is not the same as being socially anxious. It is not the same as being depressed, and it is not the same as being avoidant. These are four fundamentally different psychological states, and the world's failure to distinguish between them has caused an enormous amount of unnecessary shame. And research by psychologist Robert Coplin at Carleton University identified a category he called unsociability, which is a genuine preference for solitary activities that is not driven by fear, avoidance, or social dysfunction. Unsociable individuals are perfectly capable of social interaction. They enjoy certain social experiences. They maintain meaningful relationships. They simply do not need the same volume or frequency of social contact that others do. A study published in the British Journal of Psychology found a fascinating correlation. Individuals with higher intelligence reported lower life satisfaction when they had frequent social interactions. In other words, for highly intelligent people, more socializing actually reduced happiness. The researchers proposed the savanna theory of happiness, suggesting that while social interaction was essential for survival in ancestral environments, modern humans with greater cognitive ability are better equipped to adapt to the novel environment of solitude. This does not mean that preferring to be alone makes you smarter, but it does mean that your brain may process social stimulation differently than the average person. Where most people gain energy from interaction, your brain may spend energy during interaction. And that is not a deficit. That is a difference. Neuroscience supports this. Research has shown that introverted brains have higher baseline levels of cortical arousal, meaning they are already internally stimulated. They do not need external stimulation to feel engaged. In fact, too much external stimulation overwhelms their system, which is why crowded rooms, loud environments, and prolonged social contact feel physically draining rather than energizing. You are not broken. Your brain simply speaks a quieter language. While some preference for solitude is innate, shaped by temperament and neurology from birth, the degree to which a person retreats into solitude is often influenced by their early experiences. For many people who prefer being alone, solitude became a sanctuary during childhood. Maybe home was chaotic, and the only place you felt safe was your room with the door closed. Maybe school was socially overwhelming, and you found more comfort in books than in conversations. Maybe you were the child who did not fit in, not because you lacked social skills, but because the social world of childhood felt shallow, confusing, or performative to a mind that craved depth. Children who are naturally introspective often develop a rich inner world very early. They create imaginary friends, build elaborate mental landscapes, and develop an internal dialogue that becomes their primary source of comfort. And this inner world, because it is consistent, controllable, and endlessly stimulating, becomes more appealing than the outer world, which is unpredictable, socially demanding, and often disappointing. Over time, this preference solidifies. The child becomes an adolescent who prefers one deep friendship over 10 surface-level ones. The adolescent becomes an adult who would rather spend Friday night reading than at a party. And at every stage, the world tells them that this is wrong, that they should be more social, that they are missing out, that their best years are being wasted in solitude. But there is another origin that is equally common and far more painful. Some people learn to prefer being alone because being around others was unsafe. If your early relationships were marked by betrayal, ridicule, rejection, or emotional volatility, your brain may have concluded that solitude is the only guaranteed form of safety. This is a different kind of solitude. It is not a preference born from temperament. It is a preference born from protection, and while it may look the same from the outside, the internal experience is different. One says, "I love being alone." The other says, "I am safer being alone." And both are valid, but the second one carries a wound that deserves to be seen. Understanding which version you are is the first step toward knowing whether your solitude is nourishing you or hiding you. People who prefer being alone share several behavioral patterns that reveal how deeply this trait shapes their lives. The first is selective social investment. They do not have a wide social circle. They have a narrow, deep one. 2 or 3 people they trust completely, and their loyalty to those people is absolute. They do not collect friends. They curate them. And the people who make it into their inner circle know something that the rest of the world does not. They know the real version. The second pattern is social recovery time. After any social event, even an enjoyable one, they need time alone to decompress. This is not antisocial behavior. It is neurological necessity. Their brain has been operating at maximum processing capacity during the interaction, reading faces, managing tone, tracking multiple conversations, and it needs downtime to reset. The third pattern is meaningful conversation or nothing. Small talk is physically uncomfortable for them, not because they cannot do it, but because it feels like a waste of the limited social energy they have. They want to talk about ideas, feelings, theories, and meaning. They want to talk about the things that matter. And when forced into conversations about weather and weekend plans, they feel a drain that is almost physical. The fourth pattern is environmental sensitivity. They are deeply affected by their surroundings. Noise, clutter, artificial lighting, and crowd density all impact their internal state. They design their living spaces with intention. They choose routines that minimize sensory overload. They know exactly what environments restore them and what environments deplete them. The fifth pattern is a complicated relationship with guilt. Despite knowing that their need for solitude is genuine, they often feel guilty about it. They feel guilty for declining invitations, guilty for not wanting to call people back, guilty for preferring their own company over the company of people who love them. And this guilt is not self-generated. It is the internalized voice of a society that treats introversion as a problem. The sixth pattern is creative or intellectual immersion. People who prefer being alone often have a passion, a project, a world of thought or creation that they disappear into. And this immersion is not escapism. It is engagement. It is the thing that makes them feel most alive. And it only happens in the quiet, uninterrupted space that solitude provides. A major study published in the Journal of Research in Personality found that people who chose solitude for positive reasons, such as self-reflection, creativity, and peaceful enjoyment, reported higher levels of well-being, personal growth, and life satisfaction than those who were socially active but felt their social life was obligatory. Research conducted by Thuy-Vinh Nguyen at the University of Rochester found that solitude reduces high arousal emotions, both positive and negative, and increases a state of calm, peaceful well-being. Solitude, the study concluded, functions as an emotional regulation tool. It brings down the peaks and valleys of emotional experience and creates a steady internal equilibrium. Neuroscientific research has identified that the default mode network, The brain system that activates during rest and introspection is more active and more functionally connected in individuals who regularly practice solitude. This network is responsible for self-awareness, moral reasoning, empathy, and creative problem-solving. In other words, the time you spend alone is not idle time. It is the time when your brain does its most important work. Research from Harvard University found that people who spend time in solitude develop a stronger sense of identity and personal values. They are less susceptible to social conformity and peer pressure. They make decisions based on internal conviction rather than external validation, and they report a deeper sense of meaning in life. A long-term study published in the journal Developmental Psychology tracked individuals from adolescence into middle age and found that those who were comfortable with solitude in their teenage years showed better emotional adjustment, lower rates of depression, and higher levels of life satisfaction in adulthood compared to peers who relied heavily on social validation. The research is consistent and clear. Solitude, when chosen consciously and used intentionally, is not isolation. It is not disconnection. It is one of the most powerful tools for psychological health, creative output, and self-understanding available to the human mind. Let us talk about what this really feels like day to day. It feels like waking up on a Saturday morning with nothing planned and feeling genuinely happy about it. It feels like walking through a park alone and noticing things that you would never notice in conversation. The way the light hits the trees, the pattern of someone's footsteps, the shape of a thought that slowly becomes an idea. It feels like loving people from a slight distance. Not because you do not care, but because closeness requires energy that you can only generate in limited quantities. It feels like being at a gathering and counting down the minutes until you can leave, not because you are having a bad time, but because your internal battery is at 12% and there is no charger in this room. It feels like being misunderstood by people who love you. Your parents think you are depressed. Your friends think you are pulling away. Your partner thinks you need more excitement. No, and you cannot explain that the silence is not emptiness. The silence is fullness. The silence is where you live. And sometimes it feels like questioning yourself. Am I normal? Am I missing out? Would I be happier if I were more like them? And these questions are not yours. They are the world's questions, planted in your mind by a culture that equates being surrounded by people with being alive. You are alive. More alive in many ways than the people who cannot sit with themselves for 5 minutes without reaching for their phone. Because you have built something that most people never will. A relationship with yourself. And that relationship, quiet as it is the most important one you will ever have. The world assumes that people who prefer being alone are missing out, that they are living half a life, that the real experiences, the meaningful ones, happen between people, not within one person. But this assumption is built on an extroverted framework that treats socialization as the default and solitude as the deviation. And this framework does not account for the millions of people whose richest experiences happen internally. The world also assumes that solitude is a phase, that it is something to outgrow, that eventually the person who prefers being alone will meet the right group, find the right partner, or discover the right social setting and suddenly crave connection. And while meaningful relationships are valuable, the idea that a person's comfort with solitude is a problem waiting to be solved is not just wrong, it is harmful. The most damaging assumption is that being alone means being lonely. Loneliness is a deficit. It is wanting connection and not having it. Solitude is abundance. It is having a full inner life and choosing to inhabit it. The two look similar from the outside but feel completely different from the inside. Not everyone who is alone is lonely, and not everyone who is surrounded by people is connected. Some of the loneliest people on earth are standing in the middle of a crowd. If you are someone who prefers being alone, here is what to do with that knowledge. First, stop apologizing for it. Your need for solitude is not something that requires justification. You do not owe anyone an explanation for why you need time alone. Set this boundary clearly and without guilt. Second, audit your solitude. Is it nourishing or numbing? There is a version of solitude that fills you with energy, ideas, and peace. And there is a version that is actually avoidance disguised as preference. Be honest with yourself about which one you are currently practicing. Third, protect your alone time the way you would protect any other essential need. Schedule it. Prioritize it. Treat it as non-negotiable. Because for a brain like yours, solitude is not leisure. It is maintenance. Fourth, find your people. Not more people. Your people. The ones who understand that your silence is not rejection. The ones who do not take it personally when you need space. The ones who love you without requiring you to perform social energy you do not have. And fifth, understand that your preference for solitude gives you access to something that most people spend their entire lives searching for. A sense of self that is not dependent on external validation. Yeah, that is not a limitation. That is freedom. If this found you in a quiet room, on a quiet night, listening alone, then you are exactly where you belong. The world will keep telling you that you are too isolated, too distant, too in your head. Let it. Because the world does not understand what happens in the silence. It does not know about the ideas that form there, the healing that happens there, the self-discovery that only comes when the noise stops and you are finally alone with the most interesting person you know, yourself. You were never meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be understood deeply by a few and left in peace by the rest. And the fact that you can sit with yourself comfortably, willingly, joyfully, is one of the rarest psychological strengths a human being can possess. Oh, so do not let anyone make you feel broken for loving your own company, because in a world that is terrified of silence, you found peace in it. And that is not weakness, that is mastery. This is Unspoken Minds, and we will be here in the quiet whenever you need us.